Namaste. There's a greeting in the Himalayas.
And a warm greeting from me, Robin, to you from my heart. It's a huge pleasure to sit here with you and discuss nature,
The
Alps, music.
That's my world, but music is not my world.
And hiking isn't my world. But somehow there is an affinity between the way we look at the idea of what a journey is.
I think that this Alpensymphony is special because a musician took the experience he himself made on a mountain and put it in music. And maybe we try to do together a similar approach.
Exactly. And when I, as a musician, look at the score, my desperation is then to look into the psyche of a real mountaineer and find out what are those things about weather and death and the idea of sunlight and everything else. So, because I would say in front of a piece of music in the orchestra, I have the 4-hour Wagner opera or the 1-hour Strauss tone poem, and I see my journey, and I see the summit, I visualize it all, but no one knows it. And then, when you're on that journey, for me the equivalent is looking at the oboe player, but she might have another way to tell the story.
Yeah.
And so this idea of reacting in the moment to nature, how is that also part of this scaling the mountain? Is that hugely part of it? And it's probably a very obvious question, but...
Yeah, but I think that each of us has a different possibility to get the response. You have the same approach to your piece of music, like I have it for a certain climb. But you have many, many listeners. And all the listeners have the possibility to give to the music you put in the ears of the people
their own interpretation.
Their own interpretation. Yeah. And if, especially for the writers, if a writer is able to give millions and millions of possibilities to interpret the story, it's stronger than if you describe it in a way that's very... everybody has the same picture in his mind.
Yes, that's fascinating. So, but what...
And for the music should be the same.
It should be the same. And if my idea of realizing the score, going on my own journey to reach Gipfel, to reach the summit, is ultimately for other people, your journey with the mountain, is this purely something that is from within, that is for yourself? Or are you also climbing for people, for humanity? What is the vision of the climb?
This is in my interpretation.
Yeah.
I'm climbing for myself. I have an idea, and that's very, very important. It's not only important which summit I go to climb. Not only important how I find the line and which line I follow. I can look for an easy line, for a difficult line, for the most difficult line. On the beginning, the mountaineers, British mountaineers especially, 200 years ago, they went only to conquer the summits in the Alps. And between 100 years, more or less, all the mountains, at least the important mountains in the Alps, were conquered. The next generation came, and they did not go anymore for conquering the summit, because the summit was conquered. They went for finding new and difficult routes. They went for difficulties. The way, the route became important, and not the summit. And in a third period, just before the First World War, they went with a certain style. Style became important. Style in sense of what you use as a help to go to the summits. After my beginning, I tried to bring the style with less and less equipment on the 8,000-meter peaks. On my first 8,000-meter peak, I was invited by a Munich expedition leader. I was not the leader, I was not guiding, but I was part of this expedition. We were 18 people, and we had 9 tons of equipment.
Tons?
Yeah. 5 years later, I did an 8,000-meter peak on a new line, difficult line. 2 people, 200 kilos of equipment and nothing else.
Okay. Progression. Wow, what's amazing. I mean, so much of it is
only to understand it.
Yeah, of course. But what strikes me is that the idea that the peak, the summit, of course, is important, but it somehow becomes less and less important.
Yeah,
and for me, when I do the score, we take the Alpine Symphony. Of course, the top of the summit is beautiful music and it sounds great. But it's how we get to the place.
This is much more important.
And also what's amazing in the score is the peak comes about a third of the way through the piece, and you have a whole bit of the piece after the summit, the descent. And it's amazing that this idea of travel is almost, also as an interpreter, is almost more important than reaching it. I mean, you have to reach it.
But this is the same feeling when we are doing this activity. Going up is much more full of tension than reaching the summit. Reaching the summit is only to change direction.
Yeah.
First you go this direction, afterwards you go this direction. And on the way down you have to be careful to save your life.
And this is an ignorant question. Is it much more on the way down? Sorry, it's very ignorant. Is it generally more dangerous?
No, I would say it's more dangerous to go down.
Yeah.
But only for the fact that normally you are more tired.
It's tiredness rather than...
But going down is much less tiring than going up. But you are tired because you went up. You have also to know if you go to the highest mountains. The mountains are growing in your mind for the fact that the lack of oxygen is making you very, very slow. And so in your mind, you feel, because you're so slow, you do one step on the end, a long rest, next step, a longer rest.
Yeah.
So you have the feeling, I will never reach, because I'm getting slower and slower and slower. And the mountain is growing and growing and growing in your mind.
And just at the top, do you have time and almost the romance to be able to think about your own relationship with the world, your nature, is it purely a physical moment, or have you got, I mean, in this basest possible sense, can you enjoy the peak? Can you be there and let yourself go in any way? Can you relax?
On the top of an alpine peak, if you go not on a difficult line and you have time, you are on the summit of Mont Blanc at 9 o'clock in the morning, you can enjoy it.
You can,
But if you are on your limit, like on a 8,000 meter peak, after a very difficult climb, you are forced. It's surviving.
Yeah.
Surviving.
Simply survival.
But generally, mountaineering on a high level is nothing else than going in a place you could die for not dying. The art of mountaineering is not to die. But it's only an art if the possibility of death is there. If possibility of death is not there, it's not an art of surviving, it's only banal.
For me, when I think about music and I think about scores, it's the physical endeavor is nothing compared with what you do, but the metaphorical sense of journey and questioning one's own existence also happens with the score. And in front of my players, I always talk also about the communal journey we take and how we reach the peak. And I think what's interesting, the horn player that plays the climax of the Alpine Symphony, I will play it to you later, he can't actually really enjoy it because it's about survival, that he doesn't split the note or make a mistake. So you have to find extase and new worlds and conquering without being indulgent.
But I think for you as the director, there's a different thing like for the players.
Totally.
Yeah. They have to concentrate on the notes, they have to see you and know where they are.
Yeah.
But you could be in a totally flow.
Exactly, yes.
You personally.
Yeah.
Because you are in the music, you know the music, you know exactly where you bring now your people.
Yeah, but actually if I'm on my journey and it's the music's journey, then they are the tools, they are the rocks, they are my boots, they are what get the piece to the summit. And the kind of more I conduct, the more I realize that the orchestra is a landscape, and it's filled with danger, personalities, and how close do I look? How much do I ignore? How much do I continue on the path, which is about, some sort of conquering, actually. But there I have humans, but you are alone.
No,
Or what is your relationship with other people when you do the 8,000, when you are there with your minimal equipment? What is the relationship to other people for you?
no, normally I was with 1 or 2 partners, 3 partners.
Do you consider them friends or colleagues?
No, I consider them partners.
Partners.
It could be that one of my partners became a friend during many climbs, after many climbs. Some became friends, some remained partners.
Trust.
But during the ascent, we are a couple. So each one is having the other one always in his mind, automatically.
Wow.
And sometimes you don't speak anymore in high places because it's too. It's not possible. You are not wishing to speak.
Yeah.
Because you need all the air to survive.
Yeah.
This thin air. Because the air is thin up there. This is the problem. The air is the same like here, but it's much thinner because there's no enough pressure.
And can you hear the breath of your partner, of someone that you trust?
You
know what's...
Breath, and you see him in his eye and you understand he is afraid, he's okay, you are okay. If you are on the edge and you look to the partner a moment and you feel he's also on the edge, you decide to go back.
Yeah.
And this is living parallelly, but being quite like one person.
Yes, that seems
if it's really on the
important.
edge of the possibilities.
Yeah, it seems like a very important relationship.
And generally, also, if I'm hiking in the Alps, I'm not speaking with my partner.
No.
Now I go, and I like to be quiet.
Yes.
And I hate it if we go in 10 people, and each one is chatting. It's becoming terrible for me.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
And your thoughts, forgive the question, but it comes into my mind. Do your thoughts range from the sounds that you hear with nature to what you're going to have for breakfast tomorrow? Or conversations that you had? Do you train your mind for how it will think during a climb?
Yeah, a big climb. A simple climb, I could also start tomorrow in the Alps and go to a hill and come back. But a climb on the edge of my possibilities is growing in my mind for months, sometimes for years. So I am in touch with not with the summit, with the climb.
Yeah.
For a long time.
What's wonderful is you talk a lot about on the edge, and there's this wonderful conductor, Austrian conductor who recently died, called Niklaus Hanenchor, that said to the players during Beethoven 5, he said, only if you take it to the point of catastrophe will you find true beauty.
Yeah.
And I get the feeling that with your walking, with the ascent, with everything that you do, that there is a sense that you need to see and look death in the eyes. Mm-hmm. And to face your own mortality somehow. In
German, there is a special word, Nahtoderlebnis.
Nahtoderlebnis.
In English, I don't know. Experience near, or quite on the edge to death. These are the strongest experiences we can have. And we are all seeking for them. But in the same moment, we are also afraid of them.
Yeah.
Nobody would like to die.
Yeah.
But we know that on the edge, a little bit before dying, this is the great moment.
And maybe a huge difference then between the conductor and the climber is the fact that the idea of death, let's say with Tristan and Isolde, is in my romantic heart and in a vision, but it is nowhere near my physical life. But you take it to your own life physically.
Yeah, but we are not going to have a near-death experience, but it could happen. And only because it could happen, we go to do these difficult things on the edges.
Yeah.
And also the fascination of mountaineering for not mountaineers is coming from the fact that death is a possibility. Just if you see a climber, solo climber in a vertical wall, you know exactly if he is losing his hold, he's gone.
Yeah.
Forever. But many people are doing this.
Experiencing what you've experienced, could you even say what your relationship with death is? The idea of it?
Yeah.
For yourself?
My experience is that being really near death, it's the easiest thing to let you fall
into it.
Into it.
So the strength to...
But in the same moment, you have also this instinct, survival instinct. If you have a little bit of energy in your body and concentration, it's not allowing it. The instinct of survival is the strongest instinct we have. Otherwise, human beings would not be on this world.
Yeah.
Because it was quite difficult to live 50,000 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, Strauss, during the piece, there's sounds which are, I think, to do with the subconscious.
Yeah.
The brass, danger, death,
No,
everything.
The sounds are coming out of us,
Yeah.
but there is also sounds in
nature,
the mountain.
And
Yeah.
exactly, and so
Yeah.
there's Auf der Alm where we hear the cowbells.
Yeah,
And
this is...
And to what, when you climb, to what extent are you... to what extent are you listening to the sounds?
You hear it.
Yeah.
You don't listen to it, but it's always there.
You don't listen to it, it's always there.
Like a cover.
Yeah.
It's there. It is changing. Depends on the wind.
Yeah.
Depends on the snow.
I certainly, when I deal with the sound of the orchestra in the piece, I sort of feel I'm in touch. I have to be in touch with the sound in order to know how to navigate. So how the horn player is feeling on the day. I listen to his sound and, now he needs to move, and now I dance with him. And I wonder, in the same sense, your ears, you don't listen, but you're aware.
Yeah.
Does it influence the climb?
I would not say.
No.
No. Now, if it's coming a real snowstorm,
Yeah.
a strong snowstorm, so this could change also direction, that you are going back at least to the last camp or
Yeah.
somewhere. But if the temperature and the wind is remaining more or less the same, you hear it, but there is no danger involved in it. So you don't react on it. You know, around is everything okay. But also the mountain itself is putting out some sounds. But I could not say
Which ones they are?
because the mass on the base, there's a huge mass if you're on the base of a mountain.
Yeah.
If you're on the summit, above you is nothing.
So in a sense, it gets quieter and quieter and quieter?
Yes, and another important thing, higher and higher you go, the sky is becoming dark, on the end black. It's not anymore blue.
Well, to talk about blackness, the thing that I find so incredible about the Strauss is that it begins with Nacht and it ends with Nacht. And there's something about this piece, even if there is the high point of the summit, that it feels like we're dealing with a type of darkness and a type of existential darkness. It's interesting when you talk about the darkness of the sky. Is there also something lonely, isolating and depressive? When I get to the end of the Alpine Symphony and I put the beat down for Nacht, there is something in my heart that closes up and I feel alone. Deeply alone. even though I've got 115 players in front of me. Is there something about that darkness that goes somewhere?
Yeah. Now, if you are alone on a summit, that's a big difference between being alone or with a partner.
With a partner, yes.
Because with a partner, you can divide your success, your conquering, your positive feelings.
Yeah.
If you are alone, it's very difficult to support the fact you cannot divide it. And so standing up there alone is also sometimes like a wish to stay there, to remain there. Yes. With a partner would not happen.
To just take the moment in.
But I did only a few solo climbs in the heights, difficult rock climbs, on the edge of the possibilities. In my time today, they do more difficult things because they have better equipment. They are training much more than we did. But anyway, and I did 2 8,000-meter peaks solo, alone, from the base to the summit.
And so you share that moment then
and you
with
are
yourself.
Really lost.
You are lost.
Yeah.
You are lost.
Yeah. You are really lost if you are going alone. Because you cannot anymore see the other. If you see the other in front of you, on your back, you can take measurements. If you are alone up there, you are lost on this huge, huge mountain.
When I do a piece of music, I often come back to it, I repeat it. Let's say I do Strauss also the next year, and the piece will feel totally different. And my route, because of the room, the players, I might go on a totally different journey with it. When you repeat the climbs, but the same routes, will it always feel different?
It will feel different. Yeah.
Every time?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
you can climb a mountain 100 times and to climb 100 times a different mountain.
And it will feel like 100 different type of conquerings.
Yeah. Depends with whom you are, how you feel. It's changing also with your age.
Well, thank you. This is beautiful.
It's wonderful listening.
It's really a huge pleasure.
I'm not a musician.
No, and I'm not a climber, so it's perfect. It's perfect.